Hey everybody, this is the movie review for the Korean film The Fortress from 2017. This is the one that starred Lee Byung-hun and Kim Yoon-seok. It's a historical drama based on a true story, and it's a pretty big event for the people of this area. It's not one that I would say most people of the world are familiar with unless you studied the history of this area, but it's a very dramatic event, and it's actually a very just overall sad event for the people of this area. In this movie, the Manchu Qing forces, Qing, have invaded Joseon, and Joseon is now known as Korea. It's the harsh winter of the year 1636, and the Qing forces are demanding that Joseon yield obedience and sever their already established ties that they have pledged with the Ming dynasty. So Qing and Ming at this time are in conflict. Qing wants to pretty much take over everything. The king of Joseon and his ministers and this fairly small fighting force of about 13,000 men have taken refuge atop this mountain in a fortress. The mountain, it has a name, but it's kind of like South Korean mountain type of name. Basically, so at the top of this mountain, the ministers and the elites are fiercely debating on how to proceed with this incident. And the whole future of Joseon and its people are at stake. This film was directed by Hwang Dong-hyuk, who also directed the movie Silence, the one with Gong-yoo, and he directed Mrs. Granny, so you guys might know some of those movies. In this movie, Lee Byung-hun plays one of the ministers. He is Minister Che. He's also the Minister of Interior. Now, their actual titles aren't that important, I don't think, but very close to the king, and they are the ones giving direct counsel. So Minister Che he wants whatever will give Joseon peace, anything for the sake of peace. In this case, that does possibly mean bowing down to these foreign invaders, when the alternative is most certain death. So you could look at this character as like he's betraying Joseon. He is kind of, labeled this betrayer almost. A lot of people are calling for his head because he's showing a lot of sympathy, it seems like, towards the invading force, but really at its core, he wants peace, he wants surviving, he wants to live, he values life. Kim Yoon-seok plays another minister. He is Minister Kim, the Minister of Rights. I don't know what that means exactly, but this minister supports more of a military option, a military resistance to this invading force. He would rather go down fighting for the honor of Joseon and his people than face any indignity that comes with being subservient to this invading power that's largely seen as barbarians. So one of the things that this minister does is he makes this plan with this non-soldier, this blacksmith, who's actually atop the mountain, and he's part of this fighting force resistance. He tasks him with basically sending this secret message to a southern camp to get reinforcements to fend off this invading force. That blacksmith is played by Go-soo, and he has a very important role in this movie. So that was a cool aspect. The other minister in this movie, this movie is a lot of politics. It's a lot of debating. It's played by Song Yong-chang. He is the prime minister. He seems a little bit more interested in his own self-preservation than the previous two, but he still holds a very high reverence for the kingdom. He's just older, a little more established. So what's very interesting in this movie, I find comparing to other films of this nature, is that a lot of times in these period pieces, you see the ministers are just kind of these, really slimy, conniving, overall just crotchety old men who are basically bringing ruin to the kingdom upon themselves. They're not shown in the best light. This movie kind of brings a whole other light to the ministers and their important role that they played and how they gave counsel to the king. So what's really cool in this movie is seeing these ministers give their counsel to the king, all kind of checking each other in real time, because they're all bringing very different opinions and personalities, and it seems like they're very well chosen by the king to no one wants that constant reinforcement. They're always challenging him and causing him to think about different things and compare completely opposing, perhaps, solutions to a problem. So this is one of the movies that I think gives the best portrayal of this kind of palace politics, and a very good insight on how the king might have been advised. Each of these ministers also has their own moral ideals, and occasionally, obviously, they probably want to score some personal brownie points from the king, get the little win when the king actually does go with their solution, but those are probably in more less pressing times. This movie takes place in a very dire time, so the situation doesn't really call for that. So everybody is very serious in their counsel. It's life or death for the most part regarding this advice that they're giving. This movie is actually very entertaining to see these ministers offer opposing counsel to the king, almost building off of one another, never directly addressing the other minister. They always are directly addressing the king. The king gets to make the decision. So they're not just like debating back and forth and cursing each other out. If one of them makes a better argument, the other one has to step up their game. They've got to plead their case harder to the king to let the king side with them. Now what's super interesting is they've got this dynamic of basically the three ministers. So one of them will give one argument, the other will give the other. Totally, one's night and one's day. And then all of a sudden, just when you think, what are they going to do? The third one chimes in, and he finds some sort of a silver lining to the whole argument, almost seeing the argument from a new dimension, and gives this real fresh perspective, and usually ends up being what the king goes with. So it's a really interesting way to find a solution to a problem, even as they're calling for each other's heads, like, you should take his head off. In this movie, there's a lot of decapitated heads. I mean, whoever did them, the heads, it looks really good, so great job, but maybe one too many. So even as these ministers are calling for the heads of the other, they don't really lose their cool, they just plead their case harder. It's very interesting to watch in these regards. Park Hae-il plays the king very well. He's not, one of the main roles in this, but if he wasn't cast so well, the whole movie I don't think wouldn't have worked, and his part really comes in towards the end in how this whole conflict gets solved. Well, I don't know if you would say solved, but what the resolution is. He plays a very important part in the whole dramatic ending to this. One thing I do want to say is a lot of these historical enemy of Korea films, I find where they really portray the enemy very almost cartoonishly evil, almost a borderline caricature of what they most certainly probably were historically. So that really usually takes me out of the story. Unless you're doing sort of like an Inglourious Bastards type movie, it's really hard to sympathize with the victims when you portray it so one-sidedly. But this movie, as far as Korean films go, I think does some of that, but to a lesser extent. And they do show this a little bit through actually Woo-jin's character. He plays a character who has long renounced his Joseon heritage, and he works as a translator for one of the king generals, Q-I-N-G generals, who is preparing to siege the fortress. So they do give him a little bit of some reasons. He's able to tell his reasons for why he has sort of betrayed his heritage. And they're pretty solid for why he defected. So I do like how they give a little bit of an extra dimension to the enemy. They're not just completely cartoonish invasion evil. This movie is one of the more beautifully shot Korean movies you're gonna see in a long time. Just how the winter mountains are photographed, beautifully composed. It's breathtaking at times. Even some of the battle sequences as they're preparing. One sequence comes to mind is when they're behind their little fortifications that they build, and you see the charging cavalry of the enemy coming in. It's pretty intense. Now the battle scenes just in general are not going to be what you would see in the recent, like, The Great Battle. So if now that The Great Battle's out, the whole spectacle of this is going to seem a little bit less. The Great Battle's another movie about an invading siege. So that movie, action. This movie, The Fortress, more drama. However, some of the actual battle scenes are quite good. They're just not The Great Battle level. So overall, this movie is one of the better historical dramas that I've ever seen from Korea. The story actually also really made me want to investigate the true events, similar to what The Great Battle did. I do think this one is a little bit more, does hit more home for Koreans. It is more closer in history, and it does seem like it has more of a general implication. This movie could be described as a movie about the death of Joseon. It's definitely emotionally impacting, more so I think if you are from this part of the world and you do have Korean heritage, but I think really anyone can relate to it. So as far as acting is concerned, Lee Byung-hun, Kim Yoon-seok, Park Hae-il, all these guys, they are at the top of their game in this movie. They really bring it all. If you don't know how to go about watching The Fortress, I highly recommend picking up the CJ Entertainment Limited Edition First Press Digipack Edition. This one is, you can buy it probably imported from Korea. There's English subtitles. It's 2 discs. There's some special features. It's an awesome package to have this film. I'd highly recommend buying it. So overall, I thought this movie was excellent, and I'm going to rate it an 8.5 out of 10. Very highly recommended. I do think it's one of the better Korean films that has been released in the past couple years. So definitely go check it out. The Fortress. Until next time, this is Tyler from The Movie Beat. Keep watching movies.